Alright, what's going on, guys? Trev back again, here to bring you another video. This one's going to be doing a video talking about possibly the biggest matchup in the history of the UFC. Georges St-Pierre versus Carlos Condit's coming up, and basically on the last conference call, Dana White said that Anderson Silva is going to go to the fight to watch it, cheer George on, hopefully he wins, and afterwards, of course, they're going to set it up, have Anderson come up and do the whole cage face-off type thing for GSP against Anderson Silva if GSP beats Carlos Condit. So hopefully he does, because this could be the setup of what we've been asking for probably about the last, I don't know, 3 years now, something like that. I mean, years ago, I did a video talking about Georges St-Pierre against Anderson Silva, who would win, and, people just seem to be really amped and interested in the topic. Personally, myself, at this point, I'd be more excited to see Anderson Silva fight Jon Jones, but if the UFC wants to do GSP against Anderson Silva, I would be very amped to see it. I would really, really enjoy it. I think it's a good match. Now, he said it's going to be like Dana White said it would be a pound-for-pound match. So I don't exactly know what he means by that. Like, maybe he means that neither of their titles would be on the line. Like, maybe Anderson will fight at 185 and George will fight at, like, 170, 175, something like that. But it won't be for a belt, or it won't be for a title, which I think would make sense because, I mean, if you had a champion, like let's say George goes to 185 to fight Anderson, and he beats him, well, then he's going to hold 2 titles, okay? And then he would obviously not be able to defend both, because that's impossible, and still have the UFC have 3 fights a year with the champion, or 2 fights a year at least. That would be 6 fights between the two, or at least a minimum of 4. So that's not going to happen. That's not possible. So he'd have to give up one of the titles, either the 185 or 170 pound title. And when he does that, that's going to kind of hurt the UFC, because then you'll have someone else step up. Let's say Georges St-Pierre beats Anderson Silva, which I don't think will happen, but let's say it did. Then Carlos Condit would be, let's say the champion, or they'd have maybe him and Nick Diaz rematch, and whoever wins that would be the champion at 170. Whereas this way, if they don't put titles on line, they could just have this fight, and then both could go right back into where they were at and continue to. So even if George beat Anderson, which I don't think he will, Anderson would still keep his title, and then George will go back to 170, Anderson will be back at 185, which will kind of mess things up. But I just think that they don't really want to, have Anderson get inched out in case he did lose to George, because if he did, then George would have to stay at 185 and probably have a rematch with him. And then 170 would lose, popularity and lose money on the pay-per-views, because then you'd have somebody else who's not as big of a draw as GSP for the card, and it just wouldn't be as exciting. It wouldn't sell as well either. So I'm really excited that they're setting this up. Anderson's going to be going to watch the fight in Montreal. So obviously he's not there just for fun. He's there because business-wise he has to be there in order for them to start promoting the fight. But this all hinges around Carlos winning. So it sounds like the UFC, or against Carlos losing. It all seems like the UFC is basically banking on the fact that Carlos will lose. But we got to keep in mind, George has been out for over a year and a half, or pretty much a year and a half at this point. So that could affect him. I still think George is going to win, and I am really, really excited to see GSP against Anderson Silva, man. If we can't get Anderson Silva against Jon Jones, then at least we can get GSP against Anderson Silva, and it should be one of the biggest fights in the history of the UFC. It'll probably sell better than UFC 100. It'll probably be the biggest selling UFC card ever. I mean, I imagine it would do 3 to 4 times what a normal card would do. So it's definitely worth it for them. And for us, the fans, I mean, it'll be really, really exciting to see what happens. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about it. Do you think the UFC will get it done and finally make it happen? I think they will, and I hope GSP can pull through against Carlos. He probably will, and we'll get to see probably the biggest fight in the history of the UFC. Anyway, that's it for this video, guys. Let me know what you think about the topic, and I'll see you next time. Trev, same peace.